Good luck on your date, I said, watching her face crumble like a house of cards. In that moment, 3 years of lies finally caught up with her, and I realized I'd been living in a relationship that never really existed. Trust is a fragile thing. It's built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, shared secret by shared secret. But it only takes one lie, one perfectly calculated deception, to bring the entire foundation crashing down. My name is Vincent, and I learned this lesson in the most devastating way possible. They say hindsight is 20/20, but sometimes the signs were there all along, hiding in plain sight like shadows at noon. I just chose not to see them because I was in love. And when you're in love, you become an expert at explaining away the inexplicable, at finding reasonable excuses for unreasonable behavior. Casey and I met on a crisp October evening at our mutual friend Marcus's housewarming party. The apartment was packed with people I barely knew, the kind of gathering where you end up making small talk with strangers while nursing the same beer for 2 hours. I was actually planning to leave early. Social events had never been my strong suit, when I found myself in the kitchen, reaching for another drink at the exact same moment as a woman with auburn hair and the kind of laugh that made you want to be the reason for it. "Great minds think alike," she said, gesturing to the identical beer bottles we'd both grabbed. Her smile was genuine, not the practiced politeness you usually encounter at these things. "Or desperate minds," I replied, surprised by my own attempt at humor. I was about to use this as my excuse to escape. She laughed again, and something about the sound made me forget about leaving. I was thinking the same thing. These parties always make me feel like I'm performing in a play where everyone knows the script except me. That conversation should have lasted 5 minutes. Instead, we found ourselves tucked into a corner of Marcus's living room, talking for 3 hours straight. We discussed everything from our worst job experiences to our theories about why people put pineapple on pizza. Casey had this way of listening that made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. She'd tilt her head slightly, maintain eye contact, and ask follow-up questions that showed she was actually processing what you said rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. When the party finally wound down and we exchanged numbers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about seeing someone again. Our first official date was at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where they knew your order after 3 visits and the barista drew little hearts in your foam. Casey arrived 5 minutes early, which I later learned was typical for her. She hated being late almost as much as she hated small talk about the weather. "I have a confession," she said after we'd ordered our coffee. "I Googled you after the party." My eyebrows shot up. Should I be flattered or concerned? Probably both. The good news is you don't appear to be a serial killer. The bad news is your LinkedIn profile makes you sound incredibly boring. I nearly choked on my latte. "Thanks for the career advice." "Don't worry," she grinned. "I find boring incredibly attractive. It suggests stability, which is refreshing after my track record." This was the first hint of the openness that would both draw me to Casey and ultimately become the very thing that made her betrayal so devastating. From that first date forward, she was an open book. She told me about her ex-boyfriend who'd cheated on her with her college roommate. She shared stories about her overbearing mother and her complicated relationship with her younger sister. She even admitted to having gone through a phase in her early 20s where she dated 3 different guys simultaneously because she couldn't figure out what she wanted. "I'm not proud of it," she said during one of our early dinner dates, "but I've learned that honesty is the only foundation worth building on. I'd rather scare someone away with the truth than trap them with a lie." Looking back, those words feel like a dagger between my ribs. As our relationship progressed from casual coffee dates to weekend getaways, Casey continued to be refreshingly transparent about her past. She told me about her childhood friend Jake. They'd grown up 3 houses apart, had been inseparable until high school when his family moved across the country for his father's job. "He was like the brother I never had," she explained one evening as we walked through the park near my house. "We kept in touch through college, but you know how it is. Life gets in the way. He moved back to town about 6 months before I met you, actually. It's been nice reconnecting, but honestly it's weird seeing him as an adult. In my mind he's still the 12-year-old who used to help me catch fireflies." I appreciated her openness about Jake. In my previous relationship, my ex-girlfriend's male friendships had been a constant source of tension because she'd been secretive about them. With Casey, I felt secure. She never hid her phone, never made mysterious plans, never gave me reason to question her faithfulness. We fell into a comfortable rhythm over the first year. Casey would spend most weekends at my place. My house was larger and in a better neighborhood, plus I had a yard where we could barbecue and a basement where we'd set up a home theater system. Her apartment was tiny, barely large enough for one person, let alone two people trying to build a life together. "I love coming here," she'd say as she unpacked her weekend bag every Friday evening. "Your place feels like home in a way mine never has." Those words meant everything to me. I'd bought the house 2 years before meeting Casey, partly as an investment but mostly because I was tired of throwing money away on rent. It had felt too big for just me, too quiet, too empty. But with Casey there, filling the rooms with her laughter and her terrible singing voice while she cooked, it finally felt complete. By our second year together, we'd established routines that felt as natural as breathing. Casey would arrive Friday evenings with groceries for the weekend, we'd cook dinner together while she told me about her week at the marketing firm where she worked, and afterward we'd settle on the couch to binge-watch whatever series we were currently obsessed with. Saturdays were for errands and adventures. Farmers markets, hiking trails, exploring new restaurants. Sundays were lazy, often spent in bed until noon, reading the paper and making elaborate breakfasts that we'd eat while planning the week ahead. It was during one of those lazy Sunday mornings that Casey first brought up the idea of moving in together officially. "I know we practically live together already," she said, looking up from the real estate section of the newspaper, "but what do you think about making it official? My lease is up in 3 months." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "I think that sounds perfect." But then she surprised me. "Actually, let me think about it a little more. I don't want to rush into anything." At the time, I respected her caution. I thought it showed maturity, a desire to make sure we were making decisions for the right reasons rather than just convenience. Now I wonder if there were other factors, other people, influencing her hesitation. The engagement happened during our 3rd year together, on a warm spring evening in the same park where we'd had so many meaningful conversations. I'd been carrying the ring around for 2 months, waiting for the perfect moment. It came during one of our evening walks, as we sat on the bench overlooking the pond where families brought their children to feed the ducks. "I love this spot," Casey said, leaning against my shoulder. "Remember when we talked about traveling the world together? Seeing all those places we've only read about?" "I remember," I said, my heart hammering as I reached into my jacket pocket. I also remember thinking that it didn't matter where we went as long as we were together. When I dropped to one knee, Casey's hands flew to her mouth, tears immediately springing to her eyes. The look of surprise and joy on her face was so pure, so genuine, that it's burned into my memory, a cruel contrast to the expression I'd see months later when everything fell apart. "Vincent," she whispered, "are you serious?" "Completely serious," I said, opening the ring box. "Casey, you're my best friend, my partner, my future. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, pulling me up to kiss her before I could even get the ring on her finger. "Yes, of course, yes." We spent the following months in the euphoric haze of wedding planning. We toured venues, tasted cakes, debated guest lists and color schemes. Casey was particular about details in a way that both amused and stressed me out. She'd spend hours researching the perfect flowers for our centerpieces, then change her mind completely the next week. "I just want everything to be perfect," she'd say when I gently teased her about her indecisiveness. "This is supposed to be the most important day of our lives." I was putting money aside for our honeymoon, researching destinations in Europe that we both always wanted to visit. Casey would lie in bed next to me, scrolling through photos of Italian coastlines and French vineyards on her phone, making lists of places we absolutely had to see. "I can't believe this is really happening," she'd say, curling up against me. "I can't believe I get to marry my best friend." Those moments of pure happiness make the betrayal so much more devastating. Because they weren't fake, I know they weren't. Casey's joy was real, her love was real, at least in those moments. Which makes everything that came after so much harder to understand. The beginning of the end started on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary Friday evening in late September. Casey arrived at my house with her usual weekend bag, but she seemed different, distracted, checking her phone more frequently than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked as we prepared dinner together. "Yeah, just work stuff," she said, but she didn't elaborate, which was unusual for her. Casey typically gave me detailed debriefs of her day, complete with impressions of her co-workers and complaints about her demanding boss. During dinner, between bites of the pasta she'd made, Casey casually mentioned that she'd need to leave Saturday morning to visit her parents. "Family stuff," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "My mom's been going through some things with my aunt, and she needs me to help mediate. You know how family drama gets." I nodded sympathetically. Casey's family relationships were complicated. Her mother was prone to anxiety, and her aunt was notoriously difficult. It wasn't unusual for Casey to get pulled into their conflicts as the peacekeeper. "Do you want me to come with you?" I offered, though I secretly hoped she'd decline. Casey's mother had never quite warmed to me, and family mediation sessions were not my idea of a pleasant Saturday. "No, that's sweet, but it's probably better if I handle this alone," she said. "You know how my family gets when there are outsiders around during their drama sessions." After dinner, we settled onto the couch for our usual movie night. Casey had been excited all week about finally watching a thriller that had been sitting in our Netflix queue for months. But halfway through, I noticed her eyelids getting heavy. She'd been working late all week on a major campaign for her company, and exhaustion was catching up with her. "Come here," I said, patting my shoulder. She curled up against me, and within minutes she was fast asleep. I enjoyed these quiet moments. Casey's soft breathing, the weight of her head on my shoulder, the peaceful expression on her face that made her look younger, more vulnerable. It was during these times that I felt most certain about our future together, most grateful for the life we were building. But that night, the peace was interrupted by the constant lighting up of Casey's phone screen. At first, I assumed it was group chat notifications. She was part of several friend groups that tended to be active during weekend evenings. But as the messages continued, a nagging feeling began to grow in my stomach. When the movie ended and the credits began to roll, I gently reached for Casey's phone, intending to silence it so the notifications wouldn't wake her when I carried her to bed. We'd always been open about our phones. We knew each other's passcodes, occasionally answered each other's calls if the other was busy. It had never been an issue because we trusted each other completely. But when I picked up the phone, the preview messages on the lock screen made my blood run cold. "Jake, can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've missed you so much. Jake, I know we have to be careful, but I've been thinking about you all week. Casey, I told him I'd be at my family's. We're good to go. Red heart." My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen. This couldn't be right. There had to be some explanation, some context I was missing. Jake was her childhood friend, the brother figure she'd told me about. These messages had to be innocent, taken out of context by the preview function. Almost without thinking, I entered Casey's passcode, 1127, her birthday, and opened the full conversation thread. What I found there destroyed everything I thought I knew about the woman sleeping peacefully in my arms. The messages went back weeks. There were good morning texts filled with heart emojis, late-night conversations about how much they missed each other, references to shared memories that sounded nothing like childhood friendship and everything like romance. There were selfies, Casey in her work clothes with captions like "thinking of you," and responses from Jake that were far too intimate for any relationship Casey had described to me. But the most devastating messages were the recent ones, the planning. Jake had moved back to town 6 months ago, Casey had said. But according to these messages, they'd been meeting regularly. Always when she told me she had other plans. The afternoon she said she was dress shopping with her sister. She was with Jake. The evening she claimed to be working late on a presentation. She was with Jake. The weekend she said she needed space to think about our relationship after a small argument we'd had. She spent it with Jake. The most recent exchange was from earlier that evening, while we were eating dinner and discussing our weekend plans. "Jake, tomorrow can't come fast enough. I hate that we have to sneak around like this. Casey, I know, but we have to be smart. After the wedding, things will be different. We just have to be patient. Jake, after the wedding? Casey, you can't be serious. Casey, we've talked about this. I need to do this right. Vincent deserves that much at least. Jake, what about what I deserve? What about what you deserve? Casey, soon. I promise. Just give me a little more time. I read that exchange 3 times before the full impact hit me. Casey wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to go through with our wedding while maintaining her relationship with Jake. The wedding wasn't the beginning of our life together. It was just another obstacle she needed to navigate while continuing her deception. I sat there in the dark living room, Casey still sleeping peacefully against my shoulder, feeling like my entire world had shifted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about Casey, about myself suddenly felt like a lie. The openness I'd admired, the transparency I'd trusted, it had all been carefully constructed performance designed to hide the truth. How long had this been going on? Had Casey ever really loved me, or was I just the safe choice, the stable option she could count on while she pursued whatever she really wanted with Jake? Was our entire relationship built on deception? I carefully set Casey's phone back down and gently shifted her off my shoulder. She stirred slightly but didn't wake as I carried her to the bedroom and tucked her under the covers. I stood there for a long time, looking down at her sleeping form, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the person I'd just discovered in those text messages. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and replaying every conversation we'd ever had about Jake, looking for signs I'd missed. They were there, I realized. The way she'd smile when mentioning him, the slight defensiveness when I'd ask questions, the times she'd been vague about her whereabouts. I'd trusted her so completely that I'd explained away every red flag as something innocent. The next morning, Casey woke up in her usual good mood, stretching and yawning before padding to the bathroom for her morning routine. She emerged 20 minutes later, hair pulled back and face fresh, ready to pack for her supposed family visit. I wish I didn't have to deal with my family drama today, she said, pulling clothes from the dresser drawer where she kept weekend essentials. I'd much rather spend the day with you. I watched her pack, marveling at how effortlessly she lied. Her performance was flawless, the right amount of reluctance, the perfect touch of annoyance about her family obligations. If I hadn't seen those messages, I would have believed every word. How long do you think you'll be gone? I asked, testing her. Probably most of the day, she said without missing a beat. You know how these family things drag on. But I'll text you when I'm heading home. More lies, delivered with the same warm smile she'd given me every morning for 3 years. As Casey moved around the bedroom, gathering her things and chattering about her plans for the following week, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her immediately. I wanted to see how far she'd go with the deception, wanted to understand exactly who I'd been sharing my life with. I'll miss you, she said, kissing me goodbye at the bedroom door. Try not to be too productive without me around to distract you. I forced a smile. I'll try to contain myself. When Casey was ready to leave, I followed her to the front door as I always did. It was part of our routine. I'd walk her out, sometimes carry her bag to the car, give her a final kiss goodbye and watch her drive away. It was a small ritual that had always made me feel connected to her, even when we were apart. But this time, as I held the door open and Casey stepped onto the front porch, I couldn't go through the motions of our normal goodbye. Instead, as she turned back to give me her usual farewell smile, I looked directly into her eyes and said the words that would end everything. Good luck on your date. The change in Casey's expression was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from her face, her mouth fell open slightly, and her eyes went wide with panic. For a moment, she looked like a child caught in a lie, searching desperately for an explanation that would make everything okay again. What? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent, what are you talking about? I'm going to see my family. But I could see the truth in her eyes, the knowledge that her carefully constructed deception had finally collapsed. I raised my hand gently, stopping her before she could continue with the lies. There's no need, I said quietly. I know. And then I closed the door. The sound of the door clicking shut seemed to echo through the house. For a moment there was complete silence. Then came the knocking, desperate, frantic pounding that shook the door in its frame. "Vincent." Casey's voice was muffled but clear, filled with panic and desperation. "Vincent, please. Let me explain. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought. I'd seen the messages, read the plans, understood the full scope of her betrayal. There was nothing she could say that would change what I'd discovered. My phone began buzzing almost immediately. Text after text from Casey, each more desperate than the last. "Please open the door. Let me explain. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. I love you. Please don't do this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here. Please, Vincent. Please just listen to me." I turned my phone face down and walked away from the door. The knocking continued for another 20 minutes, accompanied by Casey's voice pleading with me to let her in, to give her a chance to explain. But what was there to explain? That she'd been lying to me for months? That she was planning to continue lying to me even after we were married? That I'd been nothing more than a placeholder while she figured out what she really wanted? Eventually the knocking stopped. I heard Casey's car start and drive away, but the silence that followed felt heavier than her desperate pleas had been. Over the following weeks, Casey's attempts to reach me became increasingly desperate. She texted constantly, long paragraphs explaining her confusion, her mistakes, her regret. She called dozens of times, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to heartbroken to pleading. She sent emails, tried reaching out through mutual friends, even contacted my sister to ask her to intervene. "I know I messed up," one text read. "I know I hurt you. But what we have is real, Vincent. Don't throw away 3 years because of my mistakes." "I never meant for any of this to happen," said another. "I was confused and scared and I handled everything wrong. But I love you. I've always loved you. Please just give me 5 minutes to explain. 5 minutes, and if you still want me gone, I'll disappear forever." But I didn't respond to any of it. How could I? Every message just reinforced what I'd already learned, that Casey was willing to say anything, promise anything, to avoid the consequences of her choices. 3 weeks after I'd closed the door on her, Casey showed up at my house. I saw her through the living room window, sitting on my front steps like she was prepared to wait all day. Part of me wanted to call the police, to have her removed from my property. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for 3 years, felt I owed her the chance to say whatever she'd come to say. When I finally opened the door, Casey looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. But it was the look of desperate hope on her face that nearly broke my resolve. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for opening the door." I didn't invite her in. We stood there on opposite sides of the threshold, 3 feet apart but separated by an ocean of broken trust. "You have 5 minutes," I said. Casey took a shaky breath and began to speak. She told me about running into Jake when he'd moved back to town, about how seeing him had brought back feelings she thought she'd buried. She claimed it had started innocently, just coffee between old friends, but had gradually become something more complicated. "I was confused," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've loved you for 3 years, Vincent. That was never a lie. But seeing Jake again, it brought back all these memories of who I used to be, who I thought I wanted to be. I got caught up in nostalgia and what-ifs, and I made terrible decisions." She insisted that she'd never meant for things to go as far as they had, that she'd been planning to end things with Jake after our wedding. "I know how that sounds," she said when she saw my expression. "I know it sounds horrible. But I thought if I could just get through the wedding, prove to myself that I was committed to you, then I could let go of the past and move forward." It was a pretty speech, full of the kind of psychological insight that might have been compelling if I hadn't read those text messages. But I'd seen the truth in her own words, the planning, the coordination, the casual way she discussed deceiving me. When Casey finally ran out of explanations and apologies, I asked her the only question that mattered to me. "If I hadn't found out, would you have told me?" The question hung in the air between us. Casey's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. She looked down at her feet, then back up at me, then down again. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Finally she whispered, "I don't know." But her hesitation had already given me the answer. If I hadn't accidentally seen those messages, Casey would have gone to meet Jake that day, spent the weekend with him, and come home to continue planning our wedding. She would have walked down the aisle knowing she was building our marriage on a foundation of lies. "Then we're done," I said simply. "I won't build a life with someone who can't be honest with me." Casey broke down completely then, sobbing and begging me to reconsider, promising to cut off all contact with Jake, swearing that she'd never lie to me again. But her promises felt empty. How could I trust someone who'd proven so capable of deception? How could I believe her remorse when she'd only confessed after being caught? "Please don't contact me again," I said as gently as I could manage. "Don't call, don't text, don't come here. Let this be goodbye." I went back inside and locked the door, leaving Casey crying on my front steps. Through the window, I watched her sit there for another hour before finally getting in her car and driving away. That was 6 months ago. I've had time to process what happened, to work through the anger and hurt and betrayal. I've talked to friends, family, even a therapist, trying to understand how I could have been so blind to what was happening right in front of me. The hardest part isn't the loneliness or the disrupted plans or even the financial loss from canceled wedding arrangements. The hardest part is questioning everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, about my own judgment. If I could be so wrong about Casey, someone I lived with, someone I planned to marry, how can I trust my instincts about anyone else? But I've also learned something important. I deserve honesty. I deserve a partner who chooses me completely, not someone who keeps me as backup while exploring other options. I deserve someone who would rather hurt me with the truth than comfort me with lies. Casey taught me that love without trust isn't really love at all. It's just a beautiful delusion that can crumble the moment reality intrudes. And while that lesson was painful to learn, it was also necessary. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone completely again, or if I'll always be looking for signs of deception in future relationships. But I do know that I made the right choice in walking away, even though it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather be alone with the truth than together with a lie. Some people might think I was too harsh, that I should have given Casey a second chance. Others might say I waited too long to confront her, that I should have fought for our relationship instead of walking away. But I believe that some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. Casey didn't just cheat on me. She systematically deceived me while planning our future together. She was willing to build our marriage on a foundation of lies, and that's not something you can fix with apologies and promises. Trust, once broken so completely, can't be rebuilt. And without trust, what's left isn't love, it's just the memory of what love used to feel like. What would you have done in my situation? Do you think I made the right choice, or should I have given Casey another chance? Share your thoughts. Your perspective might help someone else facing a similar betrayal.